What do you expect to happen next week then?
Well, we will be meeting our employers, not the government actually. They don't have a role directly in our pay negotiations, and in a way we're quite pleased that they don't. We can negotiate with our employers, and we hope we can resolve this dispute. But I'd like to say something about why we're even in this position, because firefighters have voted in huge numbers, an overwhelming vote for strike action. But they don't do that lightly. They've done that because they've had 12 years of endless attacks on their pay, so that on the basic rate of pay, a competent firefighter, which more than half the workforce are on, is using the government's preferred measure of CPI, some £4,000 a year worse off than if we'd kept up with inflation. And you know, no matter how much you love your job and want to serve the community, at the end of the day, people have bills to pay, rent to pay, mortgage to pay, and families to look after. And people have been brought to that point.
How much do firefighters get paid then?
So a competent firefighter is on just over £32,000 a year for a 42-hour week. So we're working longer than the average working week for a basic pay. Our members work permanent shifts generally. The overwhelming majority of whole-time firefighters work permanent shifts, including permanent weekends and so on. And that's for £32,000 a year, with high rates of pension contribution, for example.
Now, I think I'm right in saying you rejected a pay offer of 5% last November. What percentage are you looking for?
Well, we started, let's look at how it's unfolded. We were offered 2%, and I've got to say, if our employers hadn't started by offering 2%, our members might have reacted differently, I don't know. By then, inflation had begun to take off significantly. It wasn't me who rejected 5%, it was our members. We put it to a secret ballot, and they voted by 79% to reject that.
Yeah.
I'm not in a position to say what would settle it. We're in discussions with our employers, and I'm not going to negotiate on Sky TV, but we will be meeting them we're discussing with them this weekend and tomorrow, and we meet them on Wednesday. We hope
would it be fair to say, and look, we get this a lot from union leaders, understandably, you don't want to negotiate live on TV, but are you looking for a pay rise to match inflation, double digits? That's effectively what the nurses have given.
Well, it seems to me personally that anything less than that is a pay cut, but that's for our members to decide. Our members have to weigh up all sorts of things. Going on strike is not easy. Going on strike is a struggle. People lose money. When I hear government ministers talk about union barons calling people out on strike, they don't understand at all the real difficult decisions that workers have when they go on strike. So our members will weigh up all sorts of things. I hope that the fire service employers will come in and improve their offer in a way that we can put to our members, and our members will decide for themselves.
So, what the government would say is, look, if they give all public sector workers a pay rise that matches inflation, or even, is higher than inflation in some cases, that further stokes inflation, but also is unaffordable at a time when we are spending more on our debt interest than the entire education budget.
Well, first of all, there's no evidence whatsoever that wages have caused this round of inflation.
I think that not that it caused, but that it will make it worse.
Well, there's no evidence that public sector pay drives up inflation at all. It may lead to impacts on taxation, but let's look at the mess we're in. It wasn't firefighters or teachers or nurses who caused the economic mess we are in. We see in the press today that Liz Truss trying to redeem herself. Well, perhaps the Conservative government should look a bit closer to home as to who caused the economic chaos that working people are now being asked to pay for.
Are you concerned that lives could be put at risk if firefighters go on strike?
Well, of course, we don't underestimate the seriousness of what we are doing, and our members understand that. But as I say, at the end of the day, people have families to look after. In terms of safety, the government has brought in legislation, long before this new legislation, to require fire services to put in place resilience plans, as it's described, contingency arrangements, and each year they're supposed to check that. We've always been assured by ministers and by chief fire officers that all those plans are perfectly adequate, so that's their responsibility. The question about public safety is one that sits with the government and with chief fire officers. It is their responsibility, not the responsibility of firefighters who are trying to look after their wages.
You say that the safety is at the door of the government and others, not individual firefighters. But if I just want to look at, for example, this is Billy Holland of the West Midlands England Fire Brigades Union. He said, we expect fire services to depend on the small number who choose not to strike to provide cover during any periods of action. It goes on to say, there will be an agreement that allows firefighters and control staff to respond to major incidents during strike action if they wish to do so. I mean, it sounds an awful lot like you are putting, safety on individual firefighters to make that decision.
First of all, we need to look at the legal response. The legal responsibility sits with the fire authority and the chief fire officer. We have reached, since 2002, in any dispute we've had, we've reached what's called a major incident agreement. That allows firefighters to return to work in cases of major incident. That's negotiated at a national level and then applied at a local level. Well, Billy Holland will be reflecting what his chief officer has said in the West Midlands, as they have all over the country. Don't worry about it. And we can provide the quotes where they have said, i.e. the chief officers, don't worry, I've got it all in hand. They've never spoken to us about any of this, by the way. The chief officer there will not have been negotiating with Billy, though, the details of what they have in place. That's, as I say, a matter for the chief officer.
I guess, look, you're talking about the legal responsibility, and I'm sure you're completely right. You're a guy who's very across the details. I defer to you on it. But I guess I'm just talking about the gut instinct that people have, the fear that people will have. Oh, my gosh, the fire brigade is going on strike. Am I going to be safe? What if there's a big fire? What's going to happen?
But, Sophie, we did not call strikes. We announced before we...
I'm not talking about blame. I'm just talking about what...
Let me make the point.
What should people expect? If there is a big fire, what happens?
We delayed calling any strikes for 10 days to allow our employers to negotiate a settlement. We want to avoid a strike in the first place. We've got to look at why there are strikes in key sectors, health, ambulance, fire service, because 12 years of driving down workers' wages, and it's not acceptable.
You've made your point, eloquently about, who is to blame for the strike. In your view, the government, the cuts, people can't get a decent living, that they're working long hours in the fire brigade service. Putting all of that to one side, my question, I guess, is what happens if there is a big fire? Do people attend?
If there is a big fire, and that's a major incident, and as I say, we've got an agreement that allows a return to work in certain circumstances. That's happened in previous disputes. In fact, a Conservative minister approached me during one such incident and a return to work was agreed. That's happened in the past, and we've seen it happen in other sectors. So we have examples of where we have resolved those particular sorts of threats.
So you're confident that lives won't be put at risk by the strike then?
No. The question of whether safety is put at risk is one that sits with the government and with chief fire officers.
So you can't answer that question then?
I can't answer that because I'm not involved in those discussions.
OK. Now, we'll talk to Labour's Jonathan Reynolds directly after this interview. I'm interested to know what your message is to him, because Labour so far has said, look, we would get around the table with striking workers, we would try and negotiate a settlement, but they haven't given any guidance on what kind of pay offer they'd be prepared to give.
Well, I think trade unions would probably, and trade union members would probably want to see Labour more clearly on the side of workers. The Labour Party's was created by workers' organisations, and you would hope that Labour MPs and Labour leaders and so on would see the justice of our cause. So I think there's a bit of frustration there. Nevertheless, many Labour MPs have supported us, and we welcome that. I think we would want to see more clear support that actually these disputes need to be resolved. There need to be pay rises. You can't endlessly drive down the wages of public sector workers and expect public services to function. And that's the crisis we're in. You've got hundreds of thousands of workers in health, in ambulance service, teachers, and now in the fire and rescue service saying, actually, we can't go on like this. We need to be able to pay the bills at the end of the month, and nobody's doing anything to address that.
While I've got you, an independent report into the London Fire Brigades Union found in November some pretty awful examples of racism and sexism in the force. Female firefighters groped, people having their helmets filled with urine, a Muslim firefighter having bacon and sausages stuffed in his pockets. What's the culture like?
To be clear, that wasn't into the London Fire Brigades Union, that was into the London Fire Brigade.
Yes.
Yes. And
apologies if I said I didn't mean to say that.
We don't run the London
Absolutely
Fire.
Right. So into the London Fire Brigade.
I don't run the London Fire Brigade.
Sure.
I think that is a shocking report, and there are other shocking reports which have been in the media over the past couple of weeks. Though the people affected by that, in most cases, are members of our union, and each year we have to end up taking, for example, cases to employment tribunal on behalf of members who've been discriminated against, bullied and harassed. There has been far little done by chief fire officers, frankly, for 30 years in terms of recruitment, equality, making sure the fire service itself is more diverse, making sure that management teams are more diverse. That's a complete failure of the people running the fire and rescue service, and yes, it should be addressed. We seek to build a workplace which is welcoming, and most fire service workplaces are welcoming to people from all sorts of backgrounds. So these are horrific examples, but they're clearly not everywhere. And we've created special sections. We have a women's section, LGBT section, black members section, to make sure that the views of underrepresented groups in the fire service are heard within our union. I can't talk for management structures, but within our union they are heard, and we've attempted to address that.
I was interested when you said that there's been effectively failure of leadership over 30 years. Do you think that they get it now, or do you think that actually more needs to be done?
I don't know whether they get it now, because we hear a lot of platitudes, frankly, and there's a lot of tick box exercises where people say, we've introduced a new policy. I'm not sure that just a new policy is adequate to do this. If you go back when some of these debates started, there was joint working with us, because the vast majority of the workforce are members of our union. I've been, 25 years ago, doing joint seminars. Actually, most of that has ended. So, first of all, equality teams have been cut back as part of the cuts. There has been a retreat. The first thing the coalition government in 2010 did was scrap all equality targets. So there's been the foot taken off the gas by central government as well in relation to equality in the fire service.